If you're curious to hear a little music from our guest Carla Lucero, who we spoke to in our most recent episode, check out E4TT's annual concert of music by women and non-binary composers, Midnight Serenades, on January 25th. Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we're joined by Elinor Armer, who we spoke to in January 2021. Welcome, Ellie, and thank you so much for joining us for this composer talk before we perform the work today that you wrote for us, Matrix. Please tell us about your piece.
Well, you may remember that some time ago, you sent me the plans for the upcoming seasons, of E4TT. And one of them was to be on the theme of mothers and daughters. And I selected that one because I thought I would be able to find some poetry that I would like to set. And I'm very close to that subject. I am both a mother and a daughter. I originally, you may remember, was all wrapped up in the idea of the Persephone myth. You and I went round and round with some poems related to that. And then somehow that got discarded. A lot of the poems were too long and thoroughgoing, and some of them rather frank in their imagery and so on. So I continued looking, and I was in the process of going through my old friend and collaborator Ursula Le Guin's poems, looking for poems to set. I'm making a memorial album of my settings of her poetry. And I remembered coming across the one that she wrote called A Song for My Daughter. And that just hit the spot, totally hit the spot. Partly because of its symmetry of generations. That particular poem, refers to her daughter first as, I believe, mother of my granddaughter or granddaughter of my mother. I can't remember which came first, but there's all kinds of verbal inversion going on there. I actually created little motives to represent daughter, granddaughter, and mother. And they of course, were invertible counterpoint, if you like, if you want to sound very fancy. And those motives worked their way into the piece, which is essentially tonal or modal. It didn't seem to me to call for any experimental harmonic, advanced harmonic, super modern ideas. And I don't think any of Ursula's work has ever been anything more than just sort of naturally tonal or almost tonal for me, and preferred by her. She has in the past mentioned some other settings of her work that she didn't like for this reason or that. And so I always tried to avoid doing those things that she didn't like, from other composers. The poem was meaningful to me because I have known Elizabeth, her daughter, for longer than I knew her. It was actually through Elizabeth that I met Ursula Le Guin. I met her at Elizabeth's wedding. And Elizabeth had been my student long ago at the San Francisco Conservatory, and a brilliant student she was. And now look at her. She's, in a very important position down at UCLA, and very highly considered and so on. But we have remained friends, of course, through all of this. And speaking of friends, I was going through other poems, sets of poems, specifically a book called Audible Dawn by an old friend of mine, Rella Lossie. And we were very good friends. She has long since passed away, but I've always loved her poetry. And I don't want to spill a bean here, but the poem that I chose by her was actually addressed to her son, but we won't tell anybody that because it works just as well to pretend that it's addressed to a daughter. So I was very happy to find that one by her, and Child Your Eyes. And the vigor of it and the spontaneity and the strength of it, in a sense, was a wonderful contrast to the more lyrical, more regular poem by Ursula. I thought they would work very well together. And I always like working with the poetry by my friends and loved ones. When I have the chance, I do it. And I'm fortunate to know or to have known many poets. So it's just all in the family, if you will.
You introduced me to the poetry of Rella Lossie with Child Your Eyes, which I then found in Timepieces, her collection. And I love her poetry. I am so grateful to you for introducing me to her writing. A colleague of mine read the poem and was playing the piece and was so moved by how accurate it was in terms of her own experience as a mother and how she experienced her children, both the poem and the music. And now there's another composer who's setting another of Rella Lossie's poems in the future for us. So the chain of friendship of poetry and composition continues. Just wonderful.
Lovely. I'm happy that you're a link in that.
Yeah, you too as well. Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest, Elinor Armer, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at www.e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to audio engineer extraordinaire Stephanie Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts and tune in next week for Good Measure.